Thanks for clicking! Canada's economy could be in for some real volatility. This according to a slew of articles in the Canadian media in the aftermath of the election of President Donald Trump. And for once, the media could be correct.
It won't happen again.
We're already seeing some big changes on the election, with bond yields continuing to surge upward and fixed mortgage rates following suit, with potentially more on the horizon. And yeah, if you read these arguments, it's all tariffs. Aggressive tariffs that will be hurting Canada's economy. But how much of these arguments are real, genuine concerns, and how much are they just trumped up, as it were? So what I want to do today is go over some of the predictions being made on the Canadian economy, including the proposed tariffs, economic headwinds, and increased interest rates, discuss the likelihood that those will come to fruition, and then go over some limits on the executive. As we'll see today, the bond market is going to be of ever-increasing importance as this goes on, and I am going to be speaking with Dr. Ed Yardeni of Yardeni Research, the man who coined the term Bond Vigilante in the 1980s, to discuss what all of this means for the Canadian economy. Make sure you click like and subscribe if you want to get that interview, but for now, let's get into these arguments. On to the proposed policies. First up, as I think it's of increasing importance, tariffs. Trump has proposed a 10% across-the-board tariff on all imports going into the United States, meaning American consumers will have to pay an extra 10% tax to the government on any product that is not manufactured in the United States. The media has definitely made a big deal on these proposed tariffs, noting that Canada needs to brace for trade disruptions. And of course, yeah, if Canada did see a 10% across-the-board tariff on everything we ship to the United States, that would definitely be bad, with TD even noting that our GDP could drop by 2.5 points over the next 2 years. And obviously, if you want the pinnacle of honesty and height of good business, TD is your guy.
She doesn't mean that.
But that's a big if. If you'll remember back to Trump 1.0, often his bark was bigger than his bite. Remember when Trump threatened a 20% tariff on European car imports, and that never really materialized. He also threatened tariffs against Mexico unless they reduced the flow of migrants into the US, which of course worked, and Mexico did not see those tariffs. Also, Trump threatened to tear up NAFTA when campaigning in 2016, and then we got the USMCA, which was really not that big of a difference, albeit with some America First provisions. Which obviously begs the question, although the tariffs are being treated as fait accompli in the media, how much of this is just brinkmanship? How much of this is just deal-making? Making the opposition think that you want more than you're actually willing to take in order to weaken their position? Well, that's just introduction to negotiation.
What the f*** is that?
So, just because Trump is threatening a 10% across-the-board tariffs on all goods coming in from Canada, my guess is there is a price to get us an exception.
Read his price, and that's it. I don't want to hear nothing else.
Yeah, even one of Trump's main economic advisors said his proposals were maximalist and could be de-escalated. Again, that's negotiation language for there is a price. So, we're seeing all of this continual talk in the media about these tariffs coming our way, and everyone is acting like we don't all know that there's a big difference between what is said on the campaign trail and what actually happens.
There is? Absolutely.
Further, and finally on tariffs, though the Republicans may indeed hold the Senate and probably will the House, there is a debate going on as to whether or not Trump can unilaterally impose across-the-board tariffs without issue. Though obviously there is a way for Trump to push them through vis-a-vis the reconciliation process, but this video really isn't about the intricacies of the US legislative process. The point is, these potential tariffs and their impact on the economy and Canada's inflation rate are by no means set in stone. I'd be surprised if Canada actually saw them, though I'm just a guy on YouTube. With that said, even if Trump does impose those tariffs, what about the Canadian economy writ large? And on that, one quick note. This is how ridiculous the Canadian media is, with the article looking at how the Trump presidency could affect the pocketbooks of Canadians, looking at rising mortgage rates and the housing market separately and distinctly. Then, in the part of the article that goes over the housing market, they interview Royal LePage and Sutton Group for some unbiased expert opinion, who point out that Americans could be looking to relocate to Canada, which of course would push up demand. That's the best load you could come up with. What was it, a cold call?
I usually can think quick on my feet.
But that phenomena, Americans saying that they want to move to Canada when they don't get their way, happens every election cycle. We saw it in 2016, and then in 2017, U.S. immigration to Canada composed 3% of our overall immigration, which is actually less than the historical average. This is something that everybody knows. Americans threaten to leave the country if they don't like who got elected, but they don't leave. And the Financial Post writes this up as though it's a real possibility that could put heat into the real estate market.
You're my best friend.
No, it's far more likely that higher mortgage rates emanating out of the United States, which we'll get into later, will put downward pressure on our real estate prices. But the real estate brokerages chose to be interviewed by the Financial Post, A, either didn't know that, or B, chose not to mention it. Conclude from that what you will. Also, on that, a very quick note, I asked AI to make me an image of a book entitled The Things That Everyone Except the Real Estate Industry and the Media Knows, and it thought I wanted the outline of the actual book and gave me the following chapters. The market doesn't always go up, demand isn't infinite, and supply and demand 101.
We're not going to read it.
Regardless though, what could the Trump presidency mean for Canada's economy? Well, there's a general consensus growing that Trump plans to run the U.S. economy hot, as deregulation and tax cuts support economic growth. And, all things being equal, so long as Canada doesn't get those tariffs, then that should lead to some upward pressure on our own economic growth here as well. With the U.S. being our largest trading partner, if its economy is running hot, then ours will also feel that upward pull, which we can see clear as day over the past 50 years, with the growth rates of the two economies moving basically in lockstep. And that brings us to the last portion of the video, rising interest rates. As running the economy that hot, especially with that much deficit spending that we've talked about in other videos, will be inflationary, with the markets already bracing for higher inflation on the enactment of Trump's policies. And this isn't political opinion. Markets are putting their money where their mouth is, with the yield on the 10-year Treasury up over 70 basis points since it became pretty clear that Trump was going to be the president. And the bond markets probably aren't wrong. As argued by the Financial Times, tax cuts and tariffs are indeed inflationary, and bond investors are growing increasingly worried about the real return on their bonds. Meaning, if inflation is going to be higher, then bond investors are going to demand a higher real return. And as we've been discussing for over 2 years on this channel, higher Treasury yields in the United States mean higher mortgage rates here in Canada, higher fixed mortgage rates here north of the border, with even Rob McClister of the Financial Post now forecasting higher or at least the same fixed rates into 2025. But again, and I can't stress this enough, this all presupposes some major tariffs coming out of the United States. Are we going to see some? Probably. But is Trump going to erect a wall around the country? I'm not so sure. Let's remember, though it is often portrayed as such, the executive can't just do whatever it wants. It's been estimated that if Trump does erect those tariffs against China, China would no doubt retaliate, leading to $150 billion less goods sold to China. That's $150 billion worth of interests, worth of pressure, worth of congressional districts that won't be happy seeing that business go away. And let's also remember, that's just potential economic retaliation that these other countries could undergo. There could also be political retaliation. It's not at all unprecedented for other countries to target the U.S. political system in retaliation for tariffs. Remember back in 2002 when the Bush administration imposed those steel tariffs against Europe, and the European countries targeted districts and states and products that would be sensitive to President Bush. Florida, the Midwest, etc. So the Bush administration imposes steel tariffs against Europe, and Europe, in retaliation, targets Florida oranges. Florida, which at that time was a swing state. Again, the GOP, the executive, and the legislative branches don't just have carte blanche to do whatever they want. Now, all of this does not mean that these tariffs will not happen, or that we won't get at least some of the policies promised by President Trump on the campaign trail. Indeed, we very well might. But what it does mean is that the media appears to be treating these tariffs, these bargaining chips, as fait accompli, when history tells us that that is anything but the case. Now, the deficit spending, unfunded tax cuts, and inflationary pressures, that's probably a given. There's actually already an internal argument occurring within the GOP as to exactly how much red ink they can spill. But even they, as the bond market is trying to tell them, do not have carte blanche. There is a cost to those tax cuts, to that deficit spending, and to the inflation stemming therefrom. So, in summary, those tariffs that we're hearing so much about that are supposed to take down the Canadian economy, not exactly guaranteed. Further, if the president plans on running the U.S. economy hot, well, that could in fact translate to some economic growth here in Canada. But problems also remain, as that deficit spending, which was going to happen regardless of who won the presidency, but the bond market appears to think that it's going to be worse under Trump, does also appear at least to be bringing us higher fixed interest rates. So, putting all of this together, the main point I'm trying to make is that this is still vastly an uncertain time. It's not as easy as Trump got elected and we're going to see massive tariffs and the economy is going to tank. But it's also not as easy as Trump got elected, so the economy is going to run hot, interest rates are going to zero, and we're off to the races.
There it is!
There's a lot of moving, interconnected parts, and despite the hyperbole that we're seeing all over the media, I don't think anyone can accurately predict what 2025 is going to bring. We will obviously continue to track policies coming from the new president and how that will affect us here in Canada on this channel. Click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates, but for now, thanks so much for watching.